Mann, tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Britain stood as the sole country in Europe still resisting Germany.
We shall never surrender!
By July 1940, the map of Europe showed that Germany's dictator, Adolf Hitler, had occupied nearly every neighboring country, including Austria, Poland, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, and France, all of which had been invaded by Hitler. In the south, Italy was under the rule of another dictator, Mussolini, who had formed an alliance with Hitler. The two dictators were colluding together. Broadly speaking, only three major countries remained in Europe: Germany, the Soviet Union, and Britain. There was a peace agreement between Germany and the Soviet Union, so Hitler didn't need to worry about a Soviet attack. This meant that Britain was the last European country actively opposing Germany. On the other side of the world, America did not want to be involved in the war and, initially, stayed away. The question arises, how did the situation change? How was Hitler defeated? Let's understand the complete story of World War II in this video. This video is the second part of my World War II series. In the first part, I explained how World War II began. In this installment, I'll explain how World War II ended and how Hitler was ultimately defeated. In case you haven't watched the first part, the link will be in the description. You can watch it later. Hitler believed that since the war seemed to be tipping in his favor, Winston Churchill would want to sign a peace treaty with him, thinking Churchill wouldn't want to put his country at risk given the strengthened position of the German army. However, the opposite happened. An iconic speech was delivered by Winston Churchill, reinforcing Britain's resolve to continue fighting.
We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender!
Winston Churchill made it clear that there would be no peace treaty between himself and Hitler, signaling that the war against Germany would continue. This decision meant that Hitler would attempt to invade the UK as well. Indeed, Hitler planned Operation Sea Lion to invade Britain. As a result, the Germans had to come up with a strategy on how to attack Britain. There is no land connection between the UK and mainland Europe, so the German army couldn't simply march across. If they tried sending ships, they would face the British Royal Navy, which had more ships than Germany, putting the Germans at a disadvantage. Consequently, Hitler decided to establish control over the airspace. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, had 2,600 aircraft, while the UK had only 700. So on July 10, 1940, Hitler attacked Britain from the sky. The Luftwaffe began by bombing. Their initial goal was to destroy aircraft, airfields, and manufacturing factories. The smaller British Royal Air Force did their best to defend their country. It was a tough fight, and the British incurred heavy losses. Eventually, the Germans began attacking at night, too. August 24, 1940, was such a night when some German pilots mistakenly bombed the city of London, resulting in a large number of civilian casualties.
The Great Fire in the City of London, almost to be compared with the Fire of London in 1666. Pictures that look like hell on earth.
Winston Churchill was shocked by the warfare. Urban areas were being targeted, prompting him to respond in kind. Consequently, the UK struck back by bombing Berlin. When Hitler saw this response, he changed his tactics. Initially uninterested in targeting London, the bombing of Berlin by the UK prompted him to shift his focus. He then decided to destroy London. On September 15, 1940, Hitler ordered the German Air Force to carry out an all-out decisive attack on London, deploying more than 1,000 fighter jets in a massive show of force aimed at quickly finishing off the city. Imagine the sight for the people below. Over 1,000 fighter jets, a mix of fighters and bombers, filling the sky. Specifically, there were 1,120 aircraft involved in this attack, 6 120 were fighters and 500 were bombers. The British readied their Royal Air Force, which had only 630 aircraft at its disposal. A historic battle ensued in the sky that day.
The first wave of 100 bombers and 400 fighters was intercepted. Fighting raged all the way from the coast.
The British Royal Air Force impressively downed more than 60 Luftwaffe aircraft and lost only 29 of their own. You heard that right. The British successfully repelled the German Air Force attack. This day is now commemorated as Battle of Britain Day. You might be wondering how the German Air Force, which was larger and supposedly more powerful, was bested by the British. The reason is quite straightforward. Whenever a country is attacked, the defending nation fights not just to repel an invader, but for its very existence. For the defending country, such a battle is not merely about tactical gains, but about survival. If they do not fight with all their might, their country could be wiped out. Battle of Britain Day marked one of the first major defeats for Hitler during World War II. For the first time, Hitler experienced a significant loss. Knowing that there was little chance of success for this mission, Operation Sea Lion was postponed. Subsequently, Hitler shifted his focus from the UK to the Soviet Union. By April 1941, the map of Europe had changed significantly. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria in Eastern Europe had joined the Axis powers, forming an alliance with Germany. Moving eastwards, the countries of Yugoslavia and Greece had already been occupied by Hitler's forces. The Italian dictator Mussolini had been focused on occupying Libya and Greece. However, due to the influential British presence in the Mediterranean Sea, Mussolini needed assistance, prompting Hitler to send German troops to Libya to support the Italians. With this reinforcement, Yugoslavia and Greece were also occupied. Interestingly, Hitler was not initially very keen on invading Britain. He preferred the idea of signing a peace treaty with them instead. He thought that by shifting his focus to the Soviet Union and defeating it, Britain would be intimidated into signing the peace treaty. But why did he want to invade the Soviet Union despite there being a peace treaty in place? The real reason lay in Hitler's ideology. He deeply despised communists, and additionally, he believed that only if a country as vast as the Soviet Union was captured, Germany could become the #1 superpower in the world. Because Germany would significantly increase its land and resources. Indeed, Hitler was afflicted by megalomania. He believed himself to be the ruler of the world, driven to extremes by his thirst for power. He thought he could accomplish anything, including ruling over the entire world. However, his decision to attack the Soviet Union turned out to be a major strategic blunder, marking a turning point in World War II. Hitler's plan for invading the Soviet Union was straightforward and mirrored his approach to France. He intended to divide the German forces into 3 main groups. The first group would advance across the Baltic region towards Leningrad, the city where Stalin resided. The second group was tasked with capturing Moscow. The third group would advance from the south, moving through Ukraine. This operation began on June 22, 1941. The army of the Soviet Union was much larger than the Germans, boasting 20,000 tanks to Germany's 6,000. However, there was a major difference. German technology was much better than the Soviets. This is why Hitler still had the upper hand in this war. To protect itself, the Soviet Union joined hands with Britain and became part of the Allied powers.
Mr. Molotov signed for the Soviet this vitally important undertaking on the part of both countries to fight Hitlerite Germany till victory is won. Neither country to negotiate or conclude a separate peace.
They devised a plan together for sending supplies to the Soviet army, choosing a route through Iran. The issue, however, was that the Iranian government favored Hitler. Consequently, the UK and the Soviet Union jointly invaded Iran. This move was not particularly advantageous, as Hitler's blitzkrieg strategy enabled the Germans to advance 100 kilometers within just 2 days and seize a large swath of Soviet territory. Within a few weeks, they had made such significant progress that they were only 300 kilometers from Moscow. By this stage, disagreements between Hitler and his military commanders had caused a delay in the next German advance until October. As temperatures began to drop, the colder weather favored the Soviets, who were well accustomed to fighting in such conditions. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union secured a second strategic advantage due to their diplomatic relations with Japan. The two nations had signed a non-aggression treaty, allowing Soviet troops stationed at the eastern border, previously engaged with Japan, to redeploy to the Western Front and bolster the defense against Germany. In December 1941, another twist came to our story when Japan suddenly attacked the USA's Pearl Harbor base without any provocation.
We have witnessed this morning the distant view, the Battle of Pearl Harbor.
More than 2,300 American troops were killed in the sudden attack on Pearl Harbor. Up to that point, America had been reluctant to involve itself in World War II, observing the conflict in Europe from a distance. Having endured significant losses in World War I, the United States preferred to remain neutral. However, the unprovoked attack on Pearl Harbor was the final straw. Subsequently, America officially declared war against Japan and entered World War II.
I ask that the Congress declare a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
America spent a few months preparing for war before fully engaging in the conflict. By early 1942, countries like Thailand and Cambodia had already been invaded and occupied by Japan. By mid-1942, Hitler shifted his focus to the southern Soviet Union, targeting their supply chain from Iran in an effort to disrupt it. This decision led to a devastating battle in the city of Stalingrad, where the Soviet army could successfully defend itself against the German army. On the other side of the globe, Allied forces from America launched attacks against Japanese territories in the South Pacific. This conflict is known as the Battle of Midway. 4 important Japanese aircraft carriers and supplier carriers were destroyed in June 1942.
In the Battle of Midway, the Japanese carrier fleet, the mightiest in existence, was utterly destroyed. Japan, at the height of her military power, lost not only a major naval engagement, but in a single day doomed the Japanese Empire to ruin and defeat.
By the end of 1942, the British Army had successfully driven German and Italian forces out of Egypt. Meanwhile, the Battle of Stalingrad continued. By November 1942, with winter setting in again, the harsh conditions made it increasingly difficult for the German army to fight. At one point in Stalingrad, the German army had almost total control over the Soviets, but the Soviets continued to fight until the very end. The Battle of Stalingrad became the deadliest battle of World War II. Ultimately, the Soviet soldiers were victorious. Nearly 300,000 German troops present in Stalingrad were surrounded and subsequently surrendered in February 1943.
The heroic defense of Stalingrad. The Soviet army turning the Nazi six-month assault into the most ghastly military disaster in German history. Hands held high, the beaten Nazis pour from house after house in abject surrender.
This marked the biggest turning point in World War II. A few months later, in July 1943, Italian citizens overthrew dictator Mussolini, spurred by a growing anti-fascist movement among the populace. Discontented with their circumstances, civilians rebelled against their leader. Mussolini was later executed by Italian partisans, who were civilians from various villages armed to fight for their cause.
Bombastic Mussolini, the sawdust Caesar, comes to his end in the gutter, fitting climax to a life of treachery and double-cross. He led his country to ruin when he threw his lot in with Hitler.
A new government was formed in Italy, and this new administration decided to cease hostilities against the Allied forces. Gradually, confidence among the Allied nations rose that they could indeed defeat Hitler. In November 1943, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill met in Tehran to discuss strategies for bringing World War II to an end. June 6, 1944, marked another historical day known as D-Day. On this day, the Allied forces initiated a massive operation to land more than 150,000 British, American, and Canadian soldiers on the beaches of Normandy in France. Their mission was to engage the German army on land and liberate France, marking the first significant return of the British Army to combat on the ground against the Germans since the Dunkirk evacuation years earlier.
Another of the great decisive battles of world history has been joined. This is the day for which free people long have waited. This is D-Day.
This situation was perilous for Hitler. He had directed his army to focus on the Soviet Union, where they were suffering losses due to the harsh winter conditions and were unable to secure a complete victory. They were now facing attacks from the Western Front as well. Consequently, Hitler decided it was prudent to withdraw the German army from the Eastern Front to focus on a counterattack. As soon as Hitler's forces were withdrawn from the Soviet Union, there was a major counteroffensive from the Soviets. Within 2 months, the Soviets had regained approximately 600 kilometers of territory from Germany. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania were under the occupation of the Soviet army. On another front, the Allied forces landed in southern France as well. Gradually, nations were being liberated. Hitler's army was being expelled. Yugoslavia ousted German troops using its own forces. Germany faced attacks from 3 directions. Hitler devised his final major offensive, known as the Battle of the Bulge.
Reserves of men and materiel had been hoarded for the day of counterattack. The very much alive German army gathered its forces in the Forest Isles to strike one strong, decisive blow at the American army.
In the forest region of the Ardennes, the German army intended to drive out the Allied forces before they could formally invade Germany. The Allied forces carried out devastating aerial bombings on German cities.
The aerial phase of the West Front offensive mounts to full fury in one single day of colossal attack. This is the greatest Allied air offensive since D-Day.
In February 1945, the Yalta Conference was held in Crimea. It was announced there that any country that declared war on Germany could join the Allied forces in attacking Germany. Venezuela, Uruguay, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, and Paraguay all declared war on Germany. The last 4 months of World War II were the most painful. Each day, almost 30,000 people were being killed. As the Allied forces moved ahead, they found out about Hitler's concentration camps, where hundreds of thousands of innocent Jews were cruelly killed. Allied forces continued bombing German cities. Later on, this was criticized by some people, claiming that it was unnecessary to bomb German cities where numerous civilians were killed. Cities like Dresden crumbled to the ground. It is said that when Hitler could be killed on the ground, there was no need for the bombings. By this point in time, it was clear that Hitler was on the brink of defeat. Finally, in May 1945, Berlin was surrounded by the Soviet army. 2 days earlier, on April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life. On May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrendered, marking the end of the conflict in Europe.
The Union Jack goes up to signalize the taking over by the British troops of their sector of Berlin. The date is July the 6th, 1945. A date the history books will remember.
German territories were divided. East Germany and West Germany were established. Poland was reconstituted from a large portion of what had been East Germany. The borders of many countries were redrawn. Today, The map of Europe that you see is shaped by the outcomes of World War II. It looked completely different before the war. When the new government was established in Germany, they developed friendly relations with France, ending the long-standing animosity between the two nations. Initially, to promote cooperation, the European coal and steel community was created to facilitate trade in coal and steel between them. Some years later, neighboring countries like Italy and Britain also joined, taking trading to the next level. Eventually, in 2000, the European Union was formed, an organization that has effectively erased borders between European countries. Thanks to these developments, there has been no other war like World War II to date. In October 1945, the United Nations was established to ensure that no more world wars occur.
They have made a beginning, a brave beginning, that can build a mighty structure for peace. Out of a world of agony and total war has come a charter that must mark a turning point in human history. A new way lies ahead.
After this, the frameworks of the World Bank, IMF, and NATO were established. You might have noticed that the permanent members of the United Nations were actually the countries that were the Allied forces in World War II. An interesting fact that I haven't mentioned yet is that after Germany's surrender, World War II was not over. Japan took another 2 months to surrender. In July 1945, Japan was given an ultimatum to surrender, but this ultimatum was ignored. Subsequently, America dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and World War II ended in this dramatic fashion. I hope you liked the video. If you enjoyed it, please share it, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon for more videos. Thanks.